Well, welcome to Darren Parry today, and we're so pleased to have you doing this interview with us on really pressing questions in the Western US and in the world at large. So first of all, I will just simply ask you, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me too. This is really special for me. Um, my name is Darren Parry. For a long time, served as the tribal chairman of the Northwestern Shoshone Nation. I stepped down as tribal chairman to run for Congress, U.S. Congress. I just felt like it was another way to uh, advance some of my political beliefs and uh, especially when it comes to Native American communities. I think we're often, well, we are, we've never had a seat at the table. So that was kind of one way I thought that we might be able to advance my culture a little bit better. And so I still serve as a council member on the tribal council. And I think I've done that for about 15 years now. And I come up for reelection in 2 years and I'm not running again. So I'm going to be on the sidelines. I'll still continue all the work I'm doing. I just won't serve on the tribal council. So I grew up in Utah. Utah has always been home. My grandmother was a fierce advocate for our people, and I've just tried to continue the work that she's done to tell our story from our perspective. And that Shoshone perspective really has never been heard before. And I think the more information people have about other communities that don't look like them, the better off our society is in general, and the better off we can make decisions that affect all of us. So yeah, that's who I am. And I live here in Cache Valley now, a place that our people called home for, gosh, centuries. And so I love it here. You could not get me to move from Cache Valley today because of just the people that live here and the looking outside at the mountains, and there's no better place to be.
Yeah, we are just 15 minutes away. You live in Providence, so lucky to have you in Cache Valley. So my next question is, can you talk about the Shoshone Nation and your culture's ways of relating to the land?
Well, yeah, we look at land a little bit differently, and not differently than you, both of you, because you understand our relationship. And so, but the relationship that we have with this land that we live on and earth is something so sacred and special that we call this land our Mother Earth. She has always been the provider of our livelihoods. And so, to the mountains and the streams stand forever, and we believe the seasons walk around annually. Uh, we don't distinguish ourselves as being superior to the land. And if you look at native ways, we consider ourselves one, not only with the land, but with our animal kinfolk, we like to call them. So when you look at yourself in that, with that perspective, that we're not superior to our land and our earth, we're not superior to the animals. And so when you see injustices taking place, not only with humans, but with the earth, with the climate change and extraction industries, uh, it really hits home to Native Americans because we feel like they are as much a part of us. We feel they have a spirit, and they're a living entity. And so they're not, our human way of thinking is not superior in any way to the values that our earth and animal kingdom hold. And so um, it's, at the Bear River Massacre site, we're doing a lot to tell the story of our people. But how can you tell the story of our people without doing the work to heal the earth that's there, to get rid of the species that shouldn't be there? So land restoration is just as important a work than than to be able to tell the story and restore our people's story and our traditions that we hold. We don't look at it as any differently. So yeah, the land and how we look at the land and how we are stewards over the land is really the most important thing to Indigenous communities. We never felt like we owned the land. And a lot of people think, well, Native Americans feel like they own the land, and it was never our land to own. We were just given a stewardship over this land. And so, you know, those differences, I think, are really stark in comparison to Western culture today.
Thank you. I'm going to follow up with a question that's on a little bit different topic, but we will come back to the land and the Bear River Massacre site. Populism in combination with authoritarian governments is on the rise around the world. How do you think populism has affected Indigenous populations in the US?
Well, for one thing, it's just ensured status quo. The more things change, the more they stay the same, and especially in Indigenous communities like ours. And so, you know, when I think of populism, I think, you know, it's always people that want to look at the past, romanticize the past and what the good times. And but you know what, the past has never been kind to Indigenous communities. It's often dark. It includes genocide or a complete erasure of a people and a culture. And so, and at best, it celebrates assimilation, which is still an erasure of communities. And so when we talk about that and what effects it has on our communities, it's just given us less of a seat at the table. We've really, our past has been dark and hard. And so the future under certain administrations has looked just as bleak and dark. And so, you know, I thought the other day, I had a thought that, because I really celebrate diversity and inclusion and equality, and I try to speak out on those issues as much as I can. But I had a thought the other day driving down the road. I thought, when we hear the talk of diversity, inclusion, and equality today, and how important that is, and especially in our Black communities and our Latino communities and LGBTQ plus communities, we talk a lot about that. But how often are Native Americans included in that discussion? I've never seen them included as part of the 4 or 5 things that we always include when we talk about diversity and equality in America today. Those other groups play a prominent role, as they should. I'm not saying they shouldn't at all, but if we really want to be inclusive, then all groups that are marginalized need to be included, including Native American groups. And so we've not only been marginalized, we were the culture tried to erase us completely, and did 4 or 5 things in the history of our country to make sure that happened. So I think when we talk about those things, we need to be included in that discussion. So.
Thank you, Darren. And what have Native communities experienced during the Trump era that will change approaches to activism in the future?
That's a great question. You know, the former president, in my communities, we've seen rollbacks to protections of not only the land, but the wildlife. We've seen less environmental regulations. We've seen the failure in the pandemic response that killed my people way more than any other people, and killed more people of color than any other group in America today. And so as I look at that and how that might change the way we go forward, I think our communities need to be much more organized and prepared. And I think, you know, we live in a different world today than it was 150, 180 years ago. And we need to make sure that we elect politicians that can make a difference, and we get in the court systems and fight injustices that way. Um, I used to think my way was the only way in activism. And let me just kind of quickly explain that. I thought the way I handle things, and I'm way more gentle. I'm not a loud in your face activist carrying the signs marching down the streets. And I used to look at that as, oh my goodness, people tend to not want to, in my world, it seems like other leaders that have differing opinions than me, that's not the way to do it. It's kind of puts them on the defensive. And I always thought, well, if they just do it my way, if they be more humble about it to try to affect change, then it would be okay. But as I've gotten older, I've learned that all of these different ways that we tackle these problems, these way we look at activism, it's all important. What the children at Standing Rock did was hugely important, and they were loud and they were respectful in most cases, but they had a message and it resonated. And what it did is it moved the needle a little bit. It didn't move it the whole way, but they played a role that moved the needle just a little bit. So people that are less, don't carry the big hammer, can come in and kind of make the change too. And so I think all different aspects of activism need to be looked at and certainly brought forward. But I think at the end of the day, we really need to make sure that our activism leads to change. And change means change our political leaders, people that are like-mindedness, and then do it in the court systems. Because I hate to rest everything that we hold dear to the courts, but sometimes in the world that we live in today, they're eventually going to get there anyway. So it's just really important that we look at all ways of activism and activate all ways of activism and realize that we all play an important role, wherever that is on that spectrum, to make change.
Thank you. That's a really heartening response. In your recent book about the Bear River Massacre in the 19th century, you discuss the complex relationship of your people to white settlers in Utah and Idaho. How has this complexity affected your ability to speak to groups across political differences?
I'm not so sure it has affected it. I mean, as I just spoke about how I like to tackle things and how I like to engage with people, I think over time, I've gotten to the point that my reputation, especially with leaders, political leaders that really don't maybe have my best interest at heart, at least my reputation has given me, they know they're not going to be hit in the head with a hammer when they meet with me. And I think that reputation has really helped me to engage with people that I think we can start making differences with. To me, and look, our story with the Saints here in Cache Valley and everywhere else, it's not good. I mean, I could be terrible in every interaction I have with the Saints and hold them accountable at every turn. And they should be held accountable. And so, but my story is always about acknowledging atrocities from the past. You have to acknowledge if there's going to be reconciliation, but not staying there. It's recognizing the past, but how do we move forward together? And I think when you take that approach with people that believe differently than you do, and say, don't stay there too long in the past, but how can we move forward together? How can we move together, even though we don't agree politically on everything? What can we do to make this world a better place? Because even those who have different political opinions than I do, I don't believe that they want to have a world that's not a wonderful world to live in. I think we all kind of have the same goal. It's how do we get there? And so my story is always one about how we can move forward together to make this a better place. And so I think having that uh, mindset going in, and people kind of know that about me, has really helped me navigate some of these political waters that we live in. Look, I have a lot of good Republican friends. In fact, probably most of my friends, well, not anymore because I live up here now and I see so many other different sides. Uh, but I have a lot of friends though that are still Republicans, and I think working together and having them respect me enough to listen to what I have to say, I think it can really make a difference going forward. And so, yeah, look at the past,
Yeah,
but let's
thanks.
see what we can do.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm seeing you as a bridge builder. So that's how I see. Thanks so much for being a bridge builder. Um, so, and since you are a bridge builder, let's say that way. So do you have advice on how to engage with followers of populist leaders, uh, and or of a conspiracy thinking?
Yeah, I get to exercise this a lot. My Melody, my wife, flew to Florida yesterday to see her son and her granddaughter. So they live, my wife's from Florida. She's still, all her family's still there. And so he's a conspiracy thinker. He is exactly that question. And so he's a Trump guy. He's going to be talking about Donald Trump for 20 years from now. So he's a 35-year-old kid that is is sometimes really hard to deal with. But what I've learned over time is I really try to listen, and that is hard to do, especially when you're hearing things that you wonder how could you even have those thoughts in your mind and be a college graduate, because he's a smart kid and he's very successful in what he does. But I've come to realize that as I listen, even though it might be hard, I find that I have a little bit of respect for some of what they're feeling. Their feelings are real, they're raw, and they don't bring it up to just cause trouble. They have certain things in their mind that are problems. And so I always try to listen with a way that I respect what they're saying. And then I think as I do that, he's been much more willing to hear me and what I think. I think when you engage with people like that, you need to make sure we're looking forward, because those people always want to look in the past. They're always looking in the rear view mirror. But I think it's important that we look forward and support new policies that reflect the values of us today. And so we need to prepare and change for change and diversity. Uh, the thing I think is lacking in our society today, I think we're doing an okay job with education and training and things like that. I think we're failing miserably in our education system with training people for social change. And what that means is how are we training our kids to interact with people that have different views than us? And so I think it's okay to learn the X's and O's, but how can we really do a better job of educating our kids so they can deal with people that have completely opposite views than ourselves in a way that's constructive, in a way that we can work together moving forward. always recognizing we're always not going to agree. But I think we've done a really poor job of teaching our kids the social skills needed to critically think of ways to be able to work together. And then I think we just need to do a better job investing in people, in education and training, in family health care, and it's going to probably require a progressive tax that I think should fall more heavily upon those who benefit the most. And so I think our country has had it backwards for a long time. And if you look at it from the view I've always looked at it, I'm a Christian and I believe in Jesus Christ, and it doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not. If you believe in a higher power, you've got to come to the same conclusion that I do, that the higher power loves and cares about everyone, just not those in power and those who have money. And sometimes it's just important to me that we spend much more of our effort with those communities. My grandmother told me that we are only as strong in a community as our most vulnerable. Well, that means then that we need, if we're going to be a strong community, we need to make sure that we're taking care of the most vulnerable in that community, which is the most marginalized, and those who have never had a seat at the table.
Thank you. And remembering that common ground probably does help in talking with people who do have these raw feelings, but ideas that can seem so strange and scary sometimes. So thank you for that. Here's a thorny issue for you, especially in federal lands. Oil and gas extraction and regulation have been very controversial. How has leadership change in the US affected these controversies among Indigenous populations?
That's a loaded question, because I mean, in the last 5 years, we've seen the pendulum swing from one extreme to the other. And so, we had a President Trump, who deregulated everything and thought it was okay to sell our public lands off to the highest bidder, which is in every case is the extraction industries. So, I mean, if he would add it his way, as you go to Arches and you go to Moab, there'd be an oil rig, under the arch. I mean, almost to that effect. And so, but now I think, not getting elected to Congress was really a blessing. And I never really thought I would, but it was important to me to get the issues that are important to me out there, and maybe set an example for a Native American youth that may look at what I did to maybe run in the future, that might make a difference, give them the confidence that they might need to do that. And so I am so heartened, though, I'll take that loss every day as long as we got the current administration in place. That victory was really important to so many communities that have, marginalized communities, and it was especially important to our environment. And when we talk about extraction and oil and other things. So, and then not only with President Biden being elected, but my gosh, the first, my friend, Deb Haaland, to lead Interior. Can you imagine a Native American leader now being in charge of the lands? 1/5 of the United States is under federal control. And so she will now lead a department where she can really make a difference going forward. And so I'm really heartened by that appointment. And then heard news in the paper, the Tribune said that she'll be making a visit to Utah here in April. And so, but as we talk about this, though, it still comes with a little bit of controversy, because when I went out to the Ute Nation out in the Uinta Basin to do a little campaigning and met with the tribal leaders, I don't think there were any Utes that really voted for me, even though generally speaking, tribal nations vote Democratic. And so, because there's a complex story, and so, here is a native tribe that was moved, relocated to what was thought then the worst land in the world. I mean, but now they find gas and oil under their land. And so here you take an indigenous population that has never had money, never had any means to sustain themselves really, and you've given them a taste for the economic development. And so now they have millions of dollars all of a sudden because of the gas and extraction industries, what that provides. And so, their DNA is wired to what I talked about earlier about how we honor the land and how we need to make sure we take care of it. But now you've given a people that's never had anything really a taste of colonization or the Western world and means in the form of millions of dollars. And so they walk a tightrope as far as I'm concerned, because their indigenous upbringing, reminds them of our stewardship to the land, but their economic means and how they take care of their people, they've been much more able to take care of their people because of things that necessarily don't go together. And so my message to them was, look, I'm not wanting to shut down your oil industry tomorrow, but we need to start looking for ways that we can get away from those things, because we've got to get away. I mean, it's not a point of contention. Those things need to go away, but we need to make sure that we're replacing them with something sustainable and something that they can make money on for their people, and really give them a way to get back to who they are as a native people. And so while I'm so heartened that Deb Haaland is running Interior, I think about Ute Nations and the Navajos with coal years ago, and how that's given them a little bit of money to survive. And so I'm conscious of those things that are still there, but we certainly got to do a better job of getting away from that stuff. And I think the current administration and Deb Haaland are the perfect fit for what we want to do in America going forward.
Thank you, Darren. And I went down to U Tribe and also in blending as well. What I see is people start to see, local people start to see the impacts of human impacts, environmental impacts, and health impacts of the oil and gas development. But I don't see that much mobilization. I mean, no mobilization at all, actually, no mobilization at all. So I don't know what's gonna happen in the meantime, but there is no mobilization at all right now. Maybe because what you said is important. They need that money, not just indigenous people, but also the local people. They need that money. They try not to speak against.
Yeah.
So in a time when the populist right uses nativism in their agenda, hurting indigenous and minoritized populations, what can be done to educate people and counter this kind of thinking?
Well, that's a big task because if there was an easy answer, I think we would have done it already. But we've kind of failed miserably with that. But the big thing for me is like my run for Congress is just being an example and to future the students that are going to be our next leaders. And I think our future leaders really need to reflect our values and how we are looking at things going forward today, not looking at the past. But I read that article about Deb Haaland coming to Utah, And there was a sentence in there that really struck me, and I wrote it down because I didn't want to screw it up. And I thought, one of the elected leaders in Utah, and I don't know if it was a governor, or it really didn't say, but one of them said her visit to Utah will allow her to speak with people whose lives and work, who live and work on the land, whose voices often go unheard. And so, if you were to just read that quickly, you're thinking, yes, the Native Americans who have lived on that land, whose voices have often gone unheard, those 5 indigenous tribes that call Bears Ears home. And so, but that's not who they were referring to. They were referring to the ranchers and the locals that have lived there 100 years, that took the land from the natives who had stewardship over it. And so it got me thinking, we've got a big job ahead of us because our elected leaders today are thinking this way. They're not thinking of the indigenous people that were displaced, forever ago, not very long ago. In fact, they're thinking about those people and talking about those people that live on the lands today whose voices often go unheard. Well, that is just crazy talk to me. It's looking at it in a completely different way than I would look at it. And I'm going, well, yes, if they feel that way, how do you think we feel? I mean, seriously. And so the task ahead and what can we do is really, it's almost overwhelming if you look at it that way. But if you start breaking it down, I think, those elected leaders, they're good people. The guy that beat me, Blake Moore, is a good friend of mine now. We've gotten to know each other really well. I think they mean well. But if we really need a shift, the social change shift in America today and locally, we need to elect leaders that reflect our values more. And I think that's the way you can really make big change going forward. But they've got to start thinking differently than what they think now, because that thinking, that quote, it screams of nativism, and really we need to look at it differently. You need to look at the people that lived here for America's how old? I mean, 200 something years. And we need to look at people that lived here for thousands of years, and how, what those their values and stuff. So yeah, I think it's a big thing ahead of us. But I'm really heartened because during my campaign, I was able to, most of my staff were students at Utah State University. And so I'm looking at this future generation and the next generations. I think we're 1 or 2, well, maybe 3 or 4 election cycles away from, if we can activate the youth to really make big change, even here in Utah, which is ultra conservative. I think we're not very far away from seeing a huge shift in the value systems of what we think are important, because the people that worked on my campaign, the staff, those kids that are at Utah State University today getting an education, they want some change, and they want to be a part of it. And so once we start getting more of those, and a lot of the old timers, I love old timers, but here in Utah, they were raised in a different way and in a different environment. Their value systems are a little bit different, less inclusive. I think what I see on the horizon and what's ahead of us with leadership and the possibilities are really heartening for me. And I think we're going to be able to see some big changes here going forward.
Darren, thank you so much. But I have normally, I wasn't going to ask this question, but I need to ask this question. So I see you everywhere on the social media. Like, you are reading books to kids, like 5 years old, 7 years old, 10 years old. You are hanging out with young adults. You are hanging out with teenagers. You're talking with older people. So it's like a mission, right? It's like a mission, and reconciliation is an important thing, right? So my question is, especially you have a project in down in Idaho, right? I'm down in Idaho, and the site of the massacre happened in genocide happened in 19th century, right? So and I saw on the social media as well, you brought people to there and then you explain what happened and so forth. So and there are, and I have students, native Indian and the indigenous students, and I see the distrust. And I went down there and I had an interview with older generations as well, indigenous populations. There's a distrust between native Indian population and whites. Okay, so in the long run, your goal is to reduce this distrust among the society, or how do you see this? So because in the past, big things happen, right? Massacre, genocide, what do you call? So it is kind of hard to erase those narratives or those realities in time. So how do you see this?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, in our culture, our elders are our most important commodity we have. And when you live in a culture that relies on oral history telling and oral stories and the way we have, uh, it becomes really clear really quickly why our elders are so important. They carry the stories that teach our children the values that we have today. And so um, when you erase a certain segment of that culture, those elders, and through assimilation, through boarding schools and ways, you're effectively erasing a culture, and you're erasing a generation that could have grown up a different way with different ways of looking at the world. And so there is distrust there. And so our youth today, who still have grandparents that went through the boarding schools and went through those assimilation processes, uh, there's going to be a distrust for everything from their education on down. And so it it becomes very difficult. But and yeah, I mean, my grandmother was such a big influence on me. And so the way, I guess what I can say is the way she taught me the old ways. She taught me through stories, the way she'd learned. But she was one of our very first generation that began writing these stories down and preserving our history and culture. And when you start doing that and you're writing down and not just relying upon oral history telling to disseminate knowledge, once those elders start writing things down in a way that can be learned and taught to the youth, I think we retain that old way, that the old way of learning things, and we retain those old stories much better because we're not relying on just storytelling per se. The volumes of literature that we have from my grandmother now really speak to generations yet unborn. They can read her works and get a feeling for the traditional old ways of her people, knowing though inevitably, but there's change. And I've always been one that believed that the most successful Native Americans today are those who can best balance culture and change. And so that has been my guiding force going forward, is honoring that culture, that deep, rich culture, but realizing that we've got to change a little bit going forward. We can't rely on the ways of the past to be successful in the future. And so everything I've tried to do is honor the past as much as I can, with every fiber of my soul, but realize that I live in a changing world today, and it's different, and it's my responsibility. And that's why you see me with different groups. Before COVID hit, I went to 70 elementaries in northern Utah to share this culture. But it's important to me that they hear from an Indigenous leader, maybe in a new way, different from the way their grandparents would have heard. But it's still tribal culture, but in a way that resonates much more clearly with the processes of education that they're going to go through going forward. We're not going back to the old ways. As much as we would want to or celebrate that ship has sailed. And so what can I do as a Native American leader today to prepare the youth to change and succeed with it? And if I had one thing to say, it would be education. Education is the key. And so that's always my focus, and my goal is to make sure that our youth are being educated in a way that can help their people going forward to a better way of life, but still respecting and honoring the old ways. And so, yeah.
Thank you so much. As we finish up here, could you say something about 7-generation thinking? I know you've talked about that before, but it's something that has really helped me in how I envision the future.
Yeah, and I wish I could take credit I wish the Shoshone Nation could take credit for that kind of thinking, even though I'm sure we had that thinking. But the Iroquois people back east, and this has always resonated with me, that Iroquois leadership, they don't make any decisions in the world or in their communities without considering the effects of what it would have on 7 generations ahead. And I tell that story because I think, what if our leaders of our country took that to heart? What if all the legislation that they proposed considered the effects of 7 generations down the road? Would we make the same decisions? And so the fact that the Iroquois Nation came up with that, I don't have any oral history or storytelling about that. All I do know from a Shoshone perspective is we always considered what effect it would have upon the land, our animal kinfolk, and things going forward. And so that 7-generation story, though, really resonates with me. And I think it resonates with a lot of people about how our stewardship is. And when you see populism and nativism and things like that, it's about here and now and the past. But the story's never about the past, to me. That we can honor the past and look at it as a way to educate ourselves and to see a measuring stick to see where we're going. But the story is always the future. What can we do today to make our futures better for not only me and my kids, but our grandkids and our great grandkids? That should be the message.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, thank you so much, Darren and Heidi. So I love the conversation. Thanks again. And I am hoping after getting vaccinated, we would get together and eat some delicious foods together.
I would love
yes,
that.
Absolutely. Yes.
Thank you again. Good to see you all. Have a good one.
Thank
you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye.